Welcome to Career Playbook, a deep dive into the professions in the world of sports. I'm Nick Pietruszkiewicz, Assistant Professor of Journalism here in the School of Communications. I'm joined today by ESPN Deputy Editor Brian Kelly. Brian, thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me, Nick.
So, you have 2 degrees from this place, right?
I do. Back then, in 1999, there was no School of Communications yet.
Okay, this is good. I wasn't going to ask you the year, but since you went to the year, that's good.
Yeah.
I was going to keep that our secret.
I'll offer that up. So there was no School of Communications. It was a liberal arts degree in communications, and then I came back a few years later. I got my master's in what was known as e-media back then. Now it's turned into the interactive communications, and I did that in 2002. So those are my 2 degrees from here.
Okay. So we had, in the first episode of this, we had Greg Colley, who is a senior producer for Baseball Tonight at ESPN. And he talked about his path from Hamden to Bristol. How did you end up at ESPN?
A lot of it was a little bit of luck. So there was a career fair my junior year here, and I just threw in a resume, talked to the HR person there, and they were like, sure, and I threw in my resume, as bare bones as it was as a junior in college. And a few months later, I got a call from ESPN Radio saying they had a spot and to come up and interview. And originally it was for an internship. And so I did the interview and went back a couple weeks later, and he's got Bill Rodman, who was the hiring manager at the time, said, I have good news and bad news. The bad news is you did not get the internship. The good news is we can offer you a part-time job.
Wait, so money?
It actually paid a little bit better, yes.
There you go.
So, so I ended up getting a part-time job the summer between junior and senior year here at ESPN Radio, and that's where it took off from there.
You recently celebrated a pretty big anniversary there, didn't you?
I did. I just wrapped up my 25th year at ESPN.
25, that's a long time.
It's a very long time, but we got a nice statue to commemorate it. As people know, ESPN's owned by the Walt Disney Company. So for 25 years, you get a statue of Tinkerbell.
You have Tinkerbell. So, all right,
Yes.
So they give you statues at what, 5, 10, 15, 20, 25?
The statues are 15, 20, 25, and every 5 years after that.
Can you name all of the ones that you've gotten?
15 is Sorcerer Mickey. 20 is grown-up Simba.
Okay.
Yeah, big difference. And then Tinkerbell is 25. And I believe Pinocchio is 30, so I have my eye on that.
Oh, there's absolutely some jokes in there. But can you walk me through you don't have to go step by step of 25 years, but tell me about the progression. You've done a variety of different things there.
Yeah, so I started at ESPN Radio. For the most part, in the first 6 months or so, it was just cutting tape in the back. Literally cutting tape. We were still reel-to-reel back then and cutting tape. That's where the phrase comes from. So I did that for a little while, and then I got to write SportsCenter, which was essentially the audio version of what you saw on television. It was about 40 minutes long, 3 segments, and that was terrific. All these radio legends, guys you grew up with from WFAN and around the country, worked at ESPN Radio at the time, and so I got to write SportsCenter for them. So I did that for 4 years, and then I moved over to ESPN Digital, ESPN.com really at the time. We didn't have a mobile app or anything like that yet. So I went over there and started on what was called Team Pages, and those are sort of the clubhouse pages of your favorite teams. I moved over to the news desk for a couple years. From the news desk, I moved over to the college group, and that I did for about 10 years. And then these last 8 years, I've worked in audience engagement, where now I currently oversee push notifications. So every time your phone buzzes with an Adam Schefter update, that's my team.
How important is that adaptability and versatility in this profession, especially today?
Well, I mean, you look at my career path, there wasn't an app when I started. That wasn't a thing. And you just see all the different skill sets. While they're transferable, be able to essentially be able to write has been the sort of core, the foundation of all of it. But you have to be able to adapt to the changing culture, the changing media landscape, and just being open to those changes has enabled me to sort of have this sort of long career. Hopefully, it continues to be longer. But this career so far.
So When you look at what you've done, when you were here, you didn't probably think, and as you mentioned, you didn't think any of this is even possible because it didn't exist.
Yeah.
How interesting has the ride been, and how rewarding, how challenging, what has it been like?
All of it. Challenging is probably a good word for it, because as sports fans know, sports happen on nights and they happen on weekends, and so that's a big commitment for your personal life. So when you're in the mix in the midst of it, it doesn't feel like work. If that's, even though it's a job, it doesn't feel like work because you're just watching sports, involved in sports. It's always fun, but it is challenging, outside of that. But I wanted to change anything. Like, it was just even those long nights, the nights to where sometimes you see the sun come up. All that was definitely worth it. It's so fun.
When I was there, and I was overseeing some of our baseball coverage, October, Jason Stark, who used to work at ESPN and now works at The Athletic, one of the great people and great reporters in this entire profession, used to call October National Sleep Deprivation Month. And he was right, because I saw the sun come up a lot of days in Bristol. I talk to my students a lot about being comfortable across all platforms. They might not want to do this. They might not want to be in front of a camera. They might not want to write. They might not want to do audio. But my stressing to them is you've got to be comfortable across all platforms. You've got to be able to do a little of everything. Am I giving them good advice, or am I wrong?
Absolutely. I mean, you look at the way ESPN, obviously linear television is sort of the bread and butter, but obviously streaming is right behind it. Well, audio platforms, you see the podcast that we have, the ESPN Radio, even the streaming shows, which is sort of a separate entity. You have to have the ability to understand that audience, whether it's on platform or off. Social media is a whole other animal, because those are all sorts of different, whether you're talking about the audience for Facebook is a lot different than the audience for TikTok.
Yeah.
And so those shows are always going to be different. That content's always going to be different, but you need to be able to adapt to the audience that's in front of you.
So real quick on your time at ESPN, and then I want to get back to your time here, is everybody has an ESPN moment. Greg Colley came in and talked about him being a Red Sox fan and covering a World Series, and there's Pedro. I've talked about how my wife was a little angry seeing Jerry Rice cut her in line in the cafeteria. What's your ESPN moment?
Oh, well, the very first one, I didn't know it was an ESPN moment at the time, so I was in that back room cutting tape in ESPN Radio, and it was my first week, and it was just me and another guy, and he stepped out, and the phone rang in the back. And this is for for stringers to call in highlights and that kind of stuff. And so I just picked up ESPN, and it was like, "Hi, this is George. Can you get me in the control room?" And I walk into the control room, and I'm like, "There's some guy named George Bodenheimer on the phone." Turns out, at the time, he was the number 2 person at ESPN, would be the number 1 person a few months later. I had no idea who he was. The control room scrambled, knowing who was on the horn. So that was my first, oh, wow, okay. But then my first, holy cow, this is ESPN, was my first, Sports Center, writing Sports Center. And to hear other folks sort of read your stuff, for, at the time, I don't remember, 500 affiliates or something like that across the country. It was just an amazing moment personally, vindication almost, that it was cool. If you want my goofy one, not Goofy, from Disney.
Well played.
Yeah. We were just doing our work in a cube, and all of a sudden it sits down, Paul Konerko and Tim Hudson sit down next to me in the cube behind me. And you're kind of uh-huh. And then a sumo wrestler shows up, which, of course. And then the Florida Gator, the Wisconsin Badger, and there was a Sports Center commercial being filmed as we're working. And so you just see all these people scurrying around with mascots everywhere.
Great. We're going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back with Brian Kelly and talk about his time here at Quinnipiac. Welcome back to Career Playbook. We are here with ESPN.com's Brian Kelly. Let's talk about your time here at Quinnipiac. When you stepped foot on this campus, what did you think you wanted to do when you left it?
Originally, I thought I was going to be on air. I mean, SportsCenter was the thing in the 90s, and like, what better thing to be a SportsCenter anchor? And then, I saw myself on television, and I'm not a TV kind of guy. And that's okay.
Yeah.
I was totally all right with that. So it was an easy pivot to sort of the print side. Print side was always in my mind anyways. I always thought I would be a writer, a journalist, reporter, whatever you want to call it. That was always sort of the thing. It was very, very broad when I got here. And then that's where I gravitated toward. I went print with a little bit of radio to sort of buttress that.
So you were here you got 2 degrees here. Mm-hmm. Was there a moment, a professor, a class that kind of shaped what you ended up becoming in this journalism world? Yeah,
I always look back, and Paul Janisch was the person for me that sort of it was kind of the beginning and the end. Journalism 160. I think it's still the same course, but it was the intro to like print, and that's where you sort of learn the basics, the AP style, how to write a lead, and all that kind of stuff. And then I finished up with a 400 level class. I think it was 460, of just sort of putting all those things together. Both with Professor Janisch, and he was the guy who really like got me going in the direction I wanted to go. I still use sort of either with talking to students or even at work with some of our more junior employees. He had a great acronym: FACT, fair, accurate, concise, timely. It still holds up today.
Some things don't change.
Yeah.
So if you had to look back at 21-year-old Brian Kelly, junior in college or first-year grad student, what would this version of Brian Kelly tell that version of Brian Kelly?
Do it all. To have the sort of the guts to get out there and put yourself out there to do more. I did, the school paper and school radio, but I wish I did a little bit more of the student media. I wish I tried television. We didn't really, Q30 started when I was here, but it wasn't really on my mind of something to do because it wasn't my focus. But I wish I had just tried it and just see what happened.
So I spent 14 years at ESPN. I've been here at Quinnipiac for 12, 10 as an adjunct, 1 as a visiting professor last year, and this is my first year as an assistant professor on tenure track. You're responsible for this part of my professional life. Do you remember this story?
I do. I don't know how much of it we can tell.
Let's clean up the language Professor Emeritus Rich Hanley used that day, but if you can remember it.
Yeah, we were doing what was called QU Mashup, I believe, was the name of the program. And it was essentially to get professionals on campus to talk to a whole bunch of students, a bunch of groups and rotating stuff. And so I had been asked to come up, and I was like, well, I'm going to drag some along with me for this. I'm not going to do this by myself. And so I asked you to come up to hang out and do this.
Failing to tell me it was at 9 a.m. on a Saturday morning.
Well, some things you overlook to get things done. So we came up here, and I believe, if I remember right, we were on a panel with Mike Anthony, who is now the Hearst reporter. I believe he's at Hearst, for mostly UConn athletics. And we're talking about the business. And then after all that was done, Rich came up to us, just doing his thing, and
it's a family show.
Asked if we were interested in teaching. Both said yes. You were right there available, probably the next semester, right? Yeah. And the rest is history.
So the reason I asked to tell that story is I talk to my students a lot about embracing the moment. You don't know when your shot is going to come,
yeah, and
to be prepared for it, and to be okay with accepting it and knowing that you can do it.
Yeah.
My last question. You had a strict social media policy, and it revolved around this university.
That's correct.
Care to explain it and how then you changed that policy?
So I signed up for Twitter, now X, a million years ago, 2007 or 8 or whatever, something like that. But I never tweeted. It didn't seem like anything I needed to do for work. Follow along, follow all my writers, all that kind of stuff, but I never tweeted. And then people are on me about it at work. And so I decided, okay, if Quinnipiac ever wins the national title in hockey, then I'll tweet, okay? And so at the time, we were doing fine, and then we got to 2013, and we were so close to me tweeting. Then we got to 2016, and we were so close to me tweeting. And then we got to 2023, and we won, and I tweeted for the first time. And that was the impetus for my social media activity.
Maybe we'll have another one again this year.
I would hope so.
All right. Brian, thank you for coming along for
Thanks,
the ride. This has been Career Playbook. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.